Radio Exterior de España.
English Language Service.
Greetings from Madrid, and welcome to the broadcast. I'm Justin Cohn. Today we bring you the fourth and final episode in the mini-series on the bilateral accords between Spain and the United States, with a focus in this episode on bilateral relations during the final years of the Franco dictatorship. That will be after we take a quick look at the news.
Portugal and Spain are the first EU member states to see their COVID recovery plans approved by the European Commission. With a 10.8% decline in 2020, Spain is the member state whose economy was hit hardest by the pandemic. The Commission's approval of Spain's recovery plan will need to be followed by the endorsement of the other member states later this year. If things run smoothly, the country will receive 70 billion euros in grants and another 70 billion in loans over the next 5 years. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen.
These reforms, I'm deeply convinced, will make Spain come out of the pandemic stronger than ever before.
At a joint press conference with the European Commission President in Madrid, Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez announced that he would meet the heads of Spain's regional governments to discuss the plan and to ensure that they and the country's thousands of mayors had their say. This is a nationwide plan, a plan that involves all of us. We have an enormous opportunity to modernize our country for the generations to come.
Este es un plan de país. Es un plan que nos incumbe a todos y a todas. Tenemos una enorme oportunidad de modernizar a nuestro país para las próximas generaciones.
You're listening to the English Language Service of Spanish National Radio.
In 1969, Spanish dictator Francisco Franco had prepared for the country's future by appointing his successor, even though he would remain Spain's leader until his death in November 1975. The last years of the Franco regime, as with the years that immediately followed it, proved to be tumultuous. As anti-Franco pro-democracy movements grew, so too did the increasing brutality of the repression. For its part, the United States anticipated changes in Spain, including a future democracy, but had its interests focused on preserving the beneficial terms it had obtained in the 1953 Pact of Madrid, the deal by which the U.S. military bases were installed here. Maintaining the status quo on the bases was Washington's objective, and that was met throughout the dictatorship and into the transition. Historians point out that the U.S. turned the lack of coordination among its Spanish interlocutors at the Foreign Ministry, at the Armed Forces, and among Franco's cabinet ministers to its favor. Even after the 1966 nuclear accident in Palomares, the U.S. could still boast unrestricted freedom of movement over Spanish territory, its airspace, and its waters. The nuclear-powered Polaris submarine stationed in Grota as of 1963 also remained. Although the United States had shown little interest in relations with Spain beyond the military accord for its bases here, Washington recognized the need for increased diplomatic contacts in view of Franco's age and declining health. In April 1969, Henry Kissinger, the National Security Advisor to President Nixon, sent a secret memorandum to the U.S. Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, and the Director of the Central Intelligence, the CIA, under the heading Spain, requesting a study of our policy options. Some 30 years later, the document was declassified and reads, "The study should look beyond the completion of the negotiations for the extension of the base agreement and examine the pros and cons of various feasible lines of policy, both in the period immediately ahead and over the longer term, including the post-Franco period."
And for that reason I say, as I begin my visit to Spain, Viva la amistad España-Americana.
In 1970, in October, just months after the base agreement had been renewed, Richard Nixon visited Spain. He was the first U.S. president to do so since Eisenhower in 1959. The Spanish national radio announcer reported his arrival and drive through Madrid with the flourish then characteristic of the dictatorship.
El simbolismo de esta llegada, el simbolismo del abrazo, del saludo de los dos jefes de Estado.
The symbolism of this arrival, the symbolism of this embrace and greeting of these two heads of state upon whom peace in the world converges. Spain knows a lot about this peace, enjoying it more than 31 years, totally and happily. Together with us now, the man who is also a bastion of this world peace, who foresees it, the work of these two heads of state on this splendid Spanish morning have won the approval of the Spanish people, who know a lot about the spiritual values of these men, these champions of peace and security in the world, Franco and Nixon, Nixon and Franco together, and with them the heart of each one of us.
Paladines de la paz, de la seguridad del mundo. Franco y Nixon, Nixon y Franco juntos, y con ellos el corazón de cada uno de nosotros.
American and South Vietnamese units will attack the headquarters for the entire communist military operation in South Vietnam. This key control center has been occupied by the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong for 5 years in blatant violation of Cambodia's neutrality. We shall avoid a wider war, but we are also determined to put an end to this war.
Despite promising to end the Vietnam War with his phrase, peace with honor, Nixon and his administration expanded the conflict, ordering the secret bombings and the invasion of Cambodia. The CIA-led military campaign in neighboring Laos also extended the destruction of that country. By this time, the American press was exposing the war crimes committed by the U.S. The public became aware of the My Lai massacre in 1969. It was not the only crime American troops committed against Vietnamese civilians, but it was the single worst-known case. Anti-war demonstrations in cities and on college campuses around the U.S. and around the world became a constant, even as President Nixon sought refuge in the so-called silent majority that supported and even re-elected him.
War is now in Laos, Cambodia, it's all over Asia. A lot of local Bushes say I want the Vietnam War to end. We want to get America out of all of Asia, all of Latin America, all of Africa, out of ready to get up Country City, on this campus.
On May 4th, 1970, just days after Nixon's announced invasion of Cambodia, students at Kent State University in Ohio were protesting against the war when National Guard troops fired on the unarmed crowd. 4 students were killed and another 9 were injured. In Spain, a new generation came of age in a prosperity unimaginable for older people who had lived the hardships of the post-war period. Students and the younger workers did not share the older generation's fear of another civil war or the regime's repression. Each passing year saw more strikes, more demonstrations, more arrests, and more brutality. Franco did not relent with age. The dictatorship responded to opposition with sanctions, expulsions, arrests, and torture. Universities were closed. On the evening of January 18th, 1969,